Hi, my name is Diego Sanchez, and today I will be discussing some of the topics present in Nassim Taleb's two books, Fooled by Randomness and The Black Swan. In these two books, Taleb describes a black swan as an event of low probability and high impact. He describes it as having three attributes. First, it is an outlier. It is outside the realm of regular expectations, and nothing in the past can convincingly point us to its possibility. Second, it has an extreme impact. And third, despite it being an outlier, our human nature makes us find explanations for its occurrence after the fact, because we need to make it make sense. The induction problem is the formal name given to the black swan problem, and Taleb describes it very succinctly as learning backwards, meaning that it's attempting to derive information or patterns from a finite amount of data and extending those conclusions to an infinite unknown future. It's generalizing and predicting what will happen in the future based on what you have come to expect by observing the past. The central idea of these two books is our blindness to randomness, especially the large deviations, the black swans. Taleb argues that the models used by most experts in calculating risk or probability are inherently flawed because they exclude the possibility of these black swans. We tend to focus on the events that we can see occurring based on the past and not on the events that didn't occur. Taleb warns that falling into this trap puts us at extreme exposure risk to black swans because we act like these events can never happen or that they can never happen to us. He wants us to be aware of our risks. The next topic that I will be discussing is the notion of mediocristan versus extremistan. Both of these are terms used by Taleb to describe vastly different environments. Mediocristan is a model used to describe an environment in which no single observation or event can meaningfully affect the norm or mean. Taleb states that the supreme law of mediocristan is as follows. When the sample size is large, no single instance will significantly affect the aggregate or total. This means that particular events don't contribute much individually, only collectively. Thus, in mediocristan, you can be comfortable with what you have learned from the past, as the model and its brand of randomness does not allow for black swans, only gray swans. Extremistan, on the other hand, is a model used to describe an environment in which one single observation or unit, such as a black swan, can easily impact the aggregate or total in a very disproportionate way. This world has few big winners and a lot of losers, but not a lot of middle-of-the-road observations. One example of this is the recording industry, where you have a few very select artists who are very, very successful at the top, and a lot of people who are trying to make it and struggling, just fighting for the scraps. Taleb argues that the world that we live in today is much closer to extremistan than mediocristan. However, we operate as if our world is mediocristan, leaving us more susceptible to being hurt by black swans. This ties back into the problem of induction. For when we operate as if we live in mediocristan, we generalize our observations and we try to treat the past as a rigid model through which we can predict the future. And this is faulty logic. This distortion leads us into the ludic fallacy, which is the belief that life always operates under a set of rules, like a game, when in reality it can change at any point without warning. Taleb describes the key difference as such. In the casino, you know the rules. You can calculate the odds. But in real life, you do not know the odds. You need to discover them, and the sources of uncertainty are not defined. In real life, we don't know the probability of every event. It's impossible, and acting as if we do is ridiculous. Thus, by falling into the ludic fallacy, we tend to underestimate the role that luck actually has in life, because we believe that we know the odds and the rules that govern this world. And in doing so, we blind ourselves to the possibility of a black swan event because we never account for it. It's outside our framework of what is even possible. The narrative fallacy describes our tendency to overinterpret a series of events and assign an arbitrary cause to them due to our preference as humans for a story over a series of disjointed events. It addresses our limited ability to look at a sequence of facts without trying to weave an explanation to them or forcing a logical link between them. This causes us to think that the world is less random than it actually is. Taleb argues that this is natural to us as humans, and it's impossible for our brain to see anything in raw form without some form of interpretation. It's automatic to us as breathing or blinking. However natural it is to us, however, he warns that this can give us a false impression of understanding of an event and its causes, and it can prevent us from remaining objective in our interpretations of the world. The survivorship bias is the perceptual distortion caused by only seeing success stories in certain fields or industries, such as sports or art. It's the belief that you can figure out the properties of a certain distribution from the sample that you're witnessing, when the sample that you're witnessing only represents the winners or the best performers, not everyone, including the losers. This causes us to believe that more people are successful than actually are, that more people succeed than actually do, because we only hear about the people that make it big, not the ones that failed, as the people that have failed are rarely around long enough for us to hear about them. Taleb argues that we can't just look at the winners and make generalizations about why they succeeded based on narratives that we make after the fact. He says that in order to understand successes and analyze what caused them, we need to study the traits present in failures. The scandal of prediction is believing that anyone can predict something about the unknowable future based on their observations of the non-repeatable past. It concerns our societal opinion of experts and our dismissal of their often losing track record when it comes to prediction. And it can be summarized as this: an increase in our knowledge of a subject does not necessarily lead to an increase in our understanding of a subject. It only leads to an increase in our confidence of our understanding, which can blind us to our own biases. So just because someone is an expert in a field, it does not mean that they will know what will happen in the future. The reason that Taleb calls the Gaussian bell curve a great intellectual fraud is because of its seemingly universal, misinformed use. We are often taught in school to understand probability through the Gaussian framework. However, this is misleading, as the Gaussian model does not apply to everything. It is a normative idea that has reductionist effects. Taleb argues that even though large deviations are rare, they cannot be altogether dismissed as outliers because they have a disproportionate impact on the collective. And thus, measures of uncertainty that are based on the bell curve are not applicable to the world in which we live, which is more similar to extremistan than mediocristan, as they simply disregard the possibility and the impact of large deviations in data. Locke's definition of a madman is someone who reasons correctly from erroneous premises. They are someone who prefers to be precisely wrong, and they will shape and squeeze and reduce their world until it fits a model that they believe in. They operate in mediocristan, and their distortion of the role that luck plays in life leads them to create models that don't account for the possibility of black swan events.